Monster Reborn is one of the most iconic spell cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, right up there with things like Dark Hole and Pot of Greed. It was originally released in LOB, so it's been in the game since its very beginning, and it's a card that's seen play many times throughout the years in terms of competitive tournaments. These days though, it doesn't really pop up that often, and in today's video I wanted to explain why. Monster Reborn is a card that you might come across from time to time in 2022, which is really impressive for a card released in 2002, but it's not a card that is a staple like it used to be. Back in the day, for about 10 to 15 years almost, Monster Reborn was a staple one of in basically every single deck. These days though, that's not really the case. I do want to make myself very clear here at the beginning of the video that we are talking about Monster Reborn in the TCG, not Duel Links. I am aware that Monster Reborn was recently added into Duel Links, and from what I could see, it looks like it's pretty popular, but we are talking about the TCG, that is the physical trading card game. Real quick though, I want to tell you about something that someone emailed me about a week ago. Now this is not a paid sponsorship, I am simply promoting it because I think it's cool. Basically on the LEGO website, there's this thing called LEGO Ideas where people can submit their own designs for Legos, and some of these have been made into real sets. You have to get about 10,000 supporters on your product for LEGO to actually look at it, and this person came up with a Yu-Gi-Oh one. It has Blue Eyes, it has Dark Magician, and it actually holds cards as well. Right now this thing has about 2,400 supporters, but I think we could help it out a lot. You don't have to pay any money to vote for it. All you have to do is create a lego.com account and then support it on its page. I'll link this in the description below. It really only takes a few minutes to vote for this product, and personally, as a lifelong fan of Yu-Gi-Oh and LEGO, I would love to see this product get made in real life. Make sure to check out the link in the description below to see where you can vote for this. Now, just in case someone watching this video hasn't played Yu-Gi-Oh in a while and they can't quite remember what Monster Reborn does, here's what it does. Monster Reborn is a normal spell card that says target one monster in either graveyard, special summon it. It's a very simple and to the point card effect. All you do is special summon a monster in either player's graveyard. Now this card, even to this day in 2022, despite not seeing a lot of play, is currently still limited, which at the very least shows that Konami thinks it's powerful enough where if they actually moved it to semi-limited or unlimited, people might start to abuse it. But as a one-of, it's not really that common in modern competitive decks, and I feel like a lot of casual decks don't play this card either. So how did a card go from being so popular that it was included in basically every single deck as long as it was legal, to being a card that sees play every once in a while in combo decks, but the vast majority of players don't really use it that much? Monster Reborn is obviously a card that is good in theory. It's a free special summon from your graveyard or your opponent's graveyard, and it's led to a bunch of insane wins over the years. There are a lot of reasons why Monster Reborn probably doesn't see that much play anymore, but in my opinion, one of the biggest ones is that most modern Yu-Gi-Oh cards have hard once per turn effects. What that means is that when you use its effect, even if that card leaves the field and then returns to the field, or even if you have a second copy of the card, you can't use that card's effect as well. It's a hard once per turn, which means no matter how many copies of that card you have, you can only use that effect one time total for that turn. And that is definitely a problem when it comes to Monster Reborn, because that means when you revive a card that already used its hard once per turn effect, you can't actually use that effect again, which obviously is a big downside. Back in old school Yu-Gi-Oh, hard once per turn effects were way less common, so Monster Reborn was a lot more impactful because you could actually use the effect of the card that you revived. These days though, that doesn't happen nearly as often because pretty much every single deck has a ton of hard once per turn abilities. So I do think that is one of the biggest reasons why Monster Reborn doesn't see play. One of the other reasons, and I've talked about this in the past with cards like Pot of Avarice, is that these days people really care about starter cards, cards that let you start your plays. Monster Reborn is not really a starter because you do have to have a bit of setup to make it work. You have to have a monster card in the graveyard. Now, that can be your own monster card, it could be your opponent's monster card in their graveyard, but there has to be a card to revive. And there has to be a good card to revive as well. You don't want to revive just anything, you want to revive a card that will have an immediate impact on the game. So Monster Reborn in your opening hand won't actually help you get your plays started, and that is something that a lot of modern Yu-Gi-Oh players care a lot about. So back in the day when the game was a lot slower, people didn't really care about every single card in their opening hand being able to be played played right away, but these days people care about that a lot more. One of the other problems though is that for a while now, pretty much every single deck has had a way to revive their own monsters. So you don't need to play a specific card like Monster Reborn when your archetype already has a card that does just that. If you think back to way back in the day, not many cards actually could bring stuff back from the graveyard. You had Monster Reborn and Premature Burial and Call of the Haunted, but those were all cards that weren't part of any archetype or any specific theme. These days though, plenty of decks have their own revival spell cards or just revival effects in general, so Monster Reborn isn't nearly as valuable. This becomes an issue even more when you consider the fact that in many of these cases, the deck-specific Monster Reborns are actually searchable in those decks. Think about a deck like Sword Souls, for example, and there's a lot of decks like this, but this deck has an in-archetype Monster Reborn spell, so why would they bother playing the actual Monster Reborn, which is an unsearchable one-of, when you could just play one copy of their own Monster Reborn, which you can search basically whenever you want to? That is a lot more consistent, and that's what people care about in 2022. So Monster Reborn might not be the worst card out there. I mean, clearly it's still limited, but if a deck has a searchable in-archetype Monster Reborn, they're probably not going to bother playing the original. With all of this though, it begs the question, why is Monster Reborn still limited? I do want to clarify here that just because a card is limited doesn't mean it's overpowered, it just means that Konami hasn't decided to unlimit it yet. For example, Regeki is also limited, and basically no one plays that card anymore, but for whatever reason, Konami has kept it limited for a very long time. And Monster Reborn is kind of the same way. Back in 2013, when Monster Reborn was banned, people were playing the card pretty frequently. It wasn't maybe as popular as it had been in the past, but it was still pretty good. But when it got brought back in 2017, people didn't really care nearly as much. The game had changed a lot in those 4-ish years, and I think that was why Konami brought Monster Reborn back. But even though it really hasn't seen that many spikes in popularity since 2017, Konami has decided to keep it limited for this long period of time. Will we ever see Monster Reborn get semi-limited or unlimited? That part I'm not really sure about. They might still be afraid that it's too good, but it also might just be a case of Konami wanting to keep the card limited just because it's an iconic old school card that pretty much has always been banned or limited throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. I do want to say here before I end the video that I really do like Monster Reborn, and I do respect how much this card has impacted the overall history of Yu-Gi-Oh! This is a card that was released 20 years ago and has been featured in many winning deck lists, and even if it's not as popular nowadays 20 years later, it's still pretty cool that the card is good enough to be considered worth limiting, and it's a card that people do play from time to time. Personally, I've tried putting it in a couple different decks recently, like Blue Eyes and Bee Trooper, and it actually was a pretty good card in those decks. But you're probably not going to go out and play it in every single deck, which is a pretty big departure from how the card used to be played. I will mention again here that Monster Reborn looks to be pretty good in Duel Links right now, so it's kind of been given a second chance at life in that format, which is pretty cool. Let me know in the comment section what you think about Monster Reborn in 2022. When was the last time that you put Monster Reborn in one of your decks? I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.